Welcome back. Thank you all so much for being patient. Sorry about the false start, but here we are. And honestly, I didn't want to do this without Jen Taub, expert in white collar crime, and um, my partner in crime, felon interventor. She'll be here in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to kick this off by just making a couple of general observations. I'm going to leave it to her to go through the charges in a much more learned way than I possibly could, because basically all I have to say about them is hooray. um, but a lot was going on today. The arraignment itself was undoubtedly a quite boring, well, maybe not boring, dry affair. They went in, they sat down, charges were read. Donald left. I think we may have made some progress though, because I don't think there was an endless loop of video showing him and his Secret Service detail driving to the airport and getting on the plane. And I don't think there's another plane shadowing him and videotaping the plane ride to Mar-a-Lago. I think it's highly unlikely. Anyway, hang on one sec. Okay, Jen's going to be here imminently, in the real sense of the word, not in the Georgia, Fulton County, Georgia sense of the word. So I think what ended up being the case, and this should surprise no one, is that the least interesting and least important things we saw today were the spectacle, or I guess we should say the non-spectacle. You're in trouble when you have more reporters and camera people on the sidewalk than protesters from either side. The NYPD, of course, was out in full force, but again, that was simply because they have to be, because the person being arraigned is known for inciting violence against people who displease him. So it was both a relief because, it's got to be in the back of your head, somebody going to do something crazy. But also, I think it's something we could have bet on. What was much more interesting to me, again, outside of the fact that for the first time in history, the man who once inhabited the White House has been indicted, and not just indicted for one or two things, indicted for 34 felonies. It was the sense of, we talked about this earlier, just kind of the heaviness, even though it was maybe in some respects more of the same, having the camera on in the hallway outside the courtroom, people milling around, nothing happening. It did sort of add to the weightiness of the occasion. And it did give us a chance to see what Donald looked like going in. And the video lasted for 5 seconds, but I think that was one of the most important 5 seconds of today, because it gave us a lot of insight. And we'll get to that later. But I just wanted to take note and ignore the fact that I have a very large puffy squirrel outside on the deck, hanging upside down and eating all of the birdseed, because I made a rookie mistake and I bought a squirrel accessible bird feeder. We also saw the contrast between just the buffoons on Donald's legal team and the professionalism of District Attorney Alvin Bragg. I want to read a little bit. He gave a brief, I think less than 6-minute statement after the arraignment, And, I want to just read a couple of sections from his comments, and then contrast that with, some of the stupid things that Donald's legal team had to say. 30 fal f sorry, 34 false statements were made to cover other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. I hope the media was paying attention to this. We have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white collar crime. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money, no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. Beautifully said, perfectly stated. And then, of course, we had Mr. Takapino, I think his name is, pretending that there was no reason for the judge to single Donald out for refraining from making any violent comments because in that now infamous post of his in which he was holding a baseball bat in one picture right next to a picture of Alvin Bragg's head and swinging it, we were told that it was just a picture of Donald Trump holding up for all to see a baseball bat that was made in America. I'm not really sure where he finds these people, but they didn't have an answer for anything. They had no basis for their claims that this was that these charges were nonsense. So, I unfortunately we're just going to get more of that. However, and this is important, I do think that Donald is going to find out very quickly that he cannot, unfettered, say whatever he wants to say anymore, and probably neither can people close to him. We already have seen that his two older sons are going after the judge's daughter. I think that's ill-advised. So they're going to have to figure out how to rein it in. But bottom line is right now, Donald John Trump, Donald Jessica Trump, if you prefer, is an indicted criminal. Well, I don't know if we can call him a criminal yet. Jen will clear that up for us. But he's been indicted on 34 felony counts. And there's no changing that narrative. None. What we also know, however, is this is going to take a very long time. We've already learned that the next in-person hearing is December 4th. Last I checked, it's April. So, that's what they mean when they say the wheels of justice grind, and I'm paraphrasing, really fucking slowly. But hopefully, in the end, they grind fine. We didn't get to see other than one still shot inside the courtroom. There were no television cameras allowed, and I think that's fine, honestly. What's sort of fascinating about that is I think that it was the media who requested cameras, and neither side on the legal front wanted them, which is also information when it comes to Donald's state of mind. But honestly, I think the best, and look, we've seen pictures, we've seen him pretending to be defiant, we've seen him pretending to be totally cool with all of this, but in his unguarded moments, he's not looking particularly confident. And it wasn't until we got that 5 seconds of video, though, outside in the hallway outside of the courtroom that I think we really saw the reality of the situation as he's currently living it. So, in other words, um, I wish I could show it for you, but you can find it anywhere. It's on YouTube already. Um, and it's, he's walking from one door, the outside door, I guess the room where he was being processed. Just very short walk from that door to the courtroom, 5 seconds. And I saw people describing that as, somber. He looks somber. He looks serious. I saw somebody else describe his look as sullen, which is closer to the truth, little pouty. Like, why should he, of all people, have to be here? But that's not it either. You saw the look of a man haunted by the prospect of his future. Oh, hooray, because I was rambling.
Hi.
Actually, I was just talking about the video of Donald outside the hallway, which I think is really important. But you're here now, and I just want to clarify for everybody. I introduced you as, not just a partner in crime, my partner in crime, but also an expert in white collar crime. I just want to make sure people understand that I don't mean you're an expert at committing it. Not that anybody would think that, but that you are an expert of it. And honestly, I felt so bad earlier. You were in class. The charging documents had been unsealed, but they weren't made publicly available yet. And then we find out that they are available, and you can't find the link. And I couldn't find the link anywhere. Like, I went to the Washington Post, and they literally were like, read the documents, and you go to the page and there's nothing except a description of the charges, which was for like 2 years old. So clearly that was it. So then I sent you Talking Points memo had them, and I sent that to you, but you misunderstood me and you didn't realize that those were the documents. So I felt like you were like Tantalus, standing thirsty at the river's edge, not able to take a drink, but finally you got your hands on it. If you don't have them printed out, I'm going to be very, very disappointed. But
Well,
you didn't have time. I know.
I will tell you that I do have the documents, but when the real action is in the statement of facts.
Yeah.
I have not watched any of the punditry ever since I watched the lead up on MSNBC and I saw the hallway situation. In fact, my students and I were watching because we were hoping to get our hands on the indictment itself and be able to analyze it under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Class ended and that wasn't yet available.
Oh, no.
It had just become available, but it was really bare bones, and it was a statement of facts that gives you much more information about just how bold and important this indictment is. I don't know what other folks are saying. I'm seeing in my private text messages from some folks that maybe there are people downplaying the significance of this, but what I saw in the first paragraph was, tax evasion. What I saw throughout the document, this is the statement of facts, is the recognition that this entire scheme was designed to mislead the American people. I mean, you sort of see this, and that I see that in terms of actually the underlying additional crime that the falsification of these business records was furthering or covering up. There were several. It was interesting that they decided to go with the many crimes for which Michael Cohen served prison time, as well as the crimes to which AMI, the parent company of the National Enquirer, entered into these deferred prosecution agreement regarding. So some of these underlying crimes that the business records falsification furthered or covered up are federal offenses, but also the language around taxes is vague enough to include state tax evasion as well. And there's a lot in this statement of facts document.
So what do you say to people who are like, it's underwhelming, it's trying it's a reach to get to a felony or to a conspiracy? Because I know what I think about that, but I'm not a lawyer. So I'm curious to know what you think about that.
Well, what I would say is it would be if what's really important here is that this particular crime, the business falsifying business records in the first degree, is a commonly charged felony under New York law. At the federal level, if there is sort of business fraud, it's classified as you know. As wire fraud or mail fraud. The reason why is, or plain old fraud is a state crime, whereas if you have the U.S. mails or private courier or telephone, you get interstate commerce involved. But at the state level at New York, they don't have the equivalent in terms of a scheme to defraud like that. They use this falsification of business records for their schemes to defraud. And this is commonly charged. If you look at the research that Just Security put up on their website toward the end of March, it goes through the many times this is charged. And let's be clear, it's not just used to charge people who commit, garden variety fraud, like, failing to report, income and therefore evading taxes. But people have been charged under this felony for kind of, you'd be sort of surprised, extremely minor offenses. For example, someone who falsified on a food stamps application that a young adult lived with her was convicted for under this statute. And a married couple that was convicted of a house fire insurance fraud, attempting to recover the cash value of items that they said were lost in the fire that were not. And this was charged under the New York falsification of business records felony. So, to me, this is Donald Trump has committed fraud throughout his life, and this is a perfectly reasonable series of 34 different counts to bring. And, this will play out among the many other indictments that we will see against him shortly.
Yeah, and as District Attorney Bragg said in his post hearing statement, this is what New York City DAs do. I mean, he made it very clear. New York is the financial capital of the world. They have to be very, very careful that business in New York is being done in a way that's above board and legitimate. Otherwise, people lose faith in the system, which we've seen with the justice system in the last few years, right?
And just to be clear, because I was talking with some folks on WGBH about this, where some business people are like, "Oh my goodness, people make mistakes. You could pay your lawyer to do something, and maybe they didn't actually do legal services, but they took the money and I don't know, redecorated their house. Or what if you made a mistake? This is not you. This is not what this is. You have to have, an intent to defraud. That's very different than a mere bookkeeping error. And if you look, I can't recommend it enough. If you look through this statement of facts, you get statements that appears there's evidence that Donald Trump was doing things like telling Michael Cohen, hold off on paying Stormy, because after the election, maybe we can just then stiff her. We don't have to pay her. There's evidence that he was, for all of his saying, I had no idea this he was doing this. Well, he admitted that he was doing it on Fox and Friends a long time ago. But even now, we're coming to find out, he was closely involved in how this was structured. And therefore, I think these claims that he was helping cover up, if not facilitate, the crimes that Michael Cohen committed is right smack dab in the center of this.
Yeah, I want to pause on a couple of those things you just mentioned. First, one of them, and I didn't know this, one of these meetings was in the Oval Office. As if this one person hasn't done enough to disgrace the office that he tragically was allowed to hold. Okay. And secondly, your point about his saying quite openly, let's hold off on paying this person, one, because I'm really, really cheap. And two, because the only reason I want this to go away is because I don't want it to interfere with my chances in November, which totally blows out of the water this whole idea that it was all about protecting his family. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? I,
Look, uh, it is. I think this is why what you're saying here is if he's saying this, what it wasn't to, this wasn't to facilitate election fraud, even though Cohen went to jail for that. You're right. The fact that he was worried about his election prospects, and that's why I think the payment to the doorman in this is really important because the
yeah, can you
doorman.
talk a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of people don't know about this because it didn't
Um,
get much traction.
Yeah, there were these stories floating right before the election that that apparently I guess it had surfaced, the fall of 2015, so like a full year before. Um, there was some doorman in Trump Tower who was trying to sell information um, to AMI, claiming that Donald had fathered a child out of wedlock, and apparently this was not true. But they decided to just pay the guy to buy his silence because they just thought it would just be too damaging, right?
Mhm.
So um, that's it. That was done completely about the election. It wasn't to spare Melania's feelings because that wasn't true. And so it goes to show you that I mean this whole scheme was this catch and kill scheme, right? It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if the story's true or not. We're going to pay people because we don't want stuff to come out during the election. It turns out that the affairs with these women, I believe, were true because they've said they were.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but again, this whole scheme, this catch and kill scheme, was facilitating, this election fraud. And then in addition, there's additional tax fraud, and you really I think that you can really see where this is going and where he's going to be, why this is a felony. In other words, why it's not just a misdemeanor of falsifying records. It's right in the first two paragraphs. It says the defendant, Donald J. Trump, repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. And then it sets out the time frame, August 2015 through December 2017. The defendant orchestrated a scheme with others to influence the election by identifying and purchasing negative information. This is the catch and kill process. And it said the second part is the defendants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of payments made in furtherance of the schemes. Now, the tax purposes, at the very least, is the true up part of it. Did you follow that, Mary? Where whatever that Michael Cohen wanted to get more than a plain reimbursement
Yeah.
because plain old reimbursement wouldn't be taxable, but it was treated as payment. So they trued
Right.
up the payment. They gave him more money so that the he wasn't just reimbursed, but the extra money he was given then could pay the taxes that he would now have to pay. I don't know if that's the only um, I don't know if that's the only tax purposes that it was mischaracterized, but certainly it was a tax deduction, um, and it shouldn't have been at the corporate level. So it's a little bit it's somewhat vague in that manner, but the word tax does come up there, and then we have this piece about Michael Cohen, how he could characterize the payment in his tax returns instead of a reimbursement. This is the extra money, and then he would. So I think I'm not sure if that's the only tax violation that they're talking about here, but certainly it certainly is one. If you file a fraudulent tax return for Michael Cohen to have been treating that as income himself, and the fact that Donald facilitated that sounds like a good felony to be underlying these.
It's a solid felony for
Solid
sure.
felony.
Um, the other thing too is, I mean, first of all, what I found about, and this is true, and any well-crafted brief that I've read, which is like 4 of them. So, what do I know? I'm making generalizations with a very small n. But they tell a story. They have a very compelling narrative, and I think Bragg and his team did a phenomenal job of linking all of these. Yes, there are 34 separate charges, but this is how they relate to each other, and this is why there's a much bigger story here than just, one lie about one payment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that when you look at the statute itself, and you're going to have to ultimately convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump falsified business records under the meaning of that felony 34 times. You have to say, you've got to look at what the statute is. And it says that a person is guilty of falsifying business records in the first degree when you commit this, when you commit the second degree version of the crime, and you have an intent to defraud that includes intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof, right? So you're like, okay, well, what's the second degree version? And this has to be, again, an intent to defraud, that a person is guilty of falsifying these business records with an intent to defraud. If you, first you make or cause a false entry to be made in the business records of an enterprise. You can also prevent the making of a true entry, or you can erase or obliterate or delete them. Obviously, Donald Trump was working with his CFO, as it's described there, allegedly, to have the business records, to have a false entry in there to say that these were reimbursement for legal services when it's more than the amount of, payment for legal services when it wasn't. He knew that it was reimbursement for both the payoff to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. And he, and he even worked to make sure that Michael got the right amount of money so his tax burden would be less, so he wouldn't be out of pocket. I mean, this story, I think a jury's going to get it. This wasn't accidental. This falsification was part of this big scheme, and that's what it needs to be a felony.
Yeah, and there were other people involved in this conspiracy. I don't know if David Pecker has any criminal exposure, but this was like a team effort. And that was one of the things that I
found. They already pleaded guilty. What's amazing to me is we've had the main participants either go to jail or enter into deferred prosecution agreements. Why was individual one ever left out?
That's right. David Pecker was. Sorry, I forgot about that.
I don't know
because he was in the Oval Office at the time. That's why.
Oh, right, but he's not anymore.
No, although we do know that what's his name, Bill Barr, the most corrupt attorney general in the history of both times he was attorney general in the history of attorneys general, told the SDNY to drop out anything having to do with Donald Trump. So it's sort of a miracle.
And
that Bragg got this
apparently,
far.
Sorry to cut you off, but also apparently pressured Cy Vance at the right here at the Manhattan DA. So now we know. I mean, that's a really important part of the political piece, because people are like, well, if it was such, we hear people supporting Donald Trump saying, oh, well, if this was such a good case, why didn't they bring it? Because they were fucking threatened not to. How about that? Is that a good answer?
Right. And also we learned today that Alvin Bragg had access to materials that Cy Vance did not have access to. And
how did you learn that? I missed that.
I can't remember. But it's true.
Okay,
I know.
Mary.
Don't take my word for it. Go find out. But I
love that.
It's been a very long day, but that's what I heard. And also, I mean, again, you mentioned Just Security. Props to Ryan Goodman and his phenomenal team over there. They just do the most amazing work. Everybody should check out. Everybody should have Just Security open in a tab at all times. And a couple of weeks ago, they basically debunked Mark Pomerantz's claims. And, I think other than Donald, maybe the person looking the worst today is Mark Pomerantz, who, for those who don't remember, resigned in a huff because Alvin Bragg wasn't going to bring these charges. And he gave the impression that it was never going to happen. Clearly, it's because the district attorney didn't think the case was ready yet. And as he repeated today, we charge when we're ready to, and we were
Yeah.
ready to today. I I wanted to shift gears a little bit to um the lawyers. What was your, I don't know if you had a chance to see the post hearing presser that Donald's legal team gave.
I saw part of it and then I had to switch because then I wanted to read the indictment.
Right.
It seemed messy. Uh,
Yes, it was messy.
I mean, what I remember listening to them saying they don't even talk about what the underlying offenses were. And then I looked at the indictment. I'm like, that's really weird. But they don't mention the statement of facts. What did they do? Was it a clown car?
Yeah, they're just clearly buffoons. And I think the first question was, did the judge um caution Donald to you know, contain his outbursts, not threaten the lives of people, basically.
Uh huh.
And they're like, well, he said that to everybody. Everybody on both sides was told not to say anything untoward. And they were asked about the baseball bat image, and I think it was Tacopino.
Oh
Um,
God, what did he
who
do?
he's like, that was just him holding up a baseball bat that was made in America.
Oh, I heard that part. And I was like, are you kidding me?
What? Yeah. So between them and the fact that Donald's children are posting pictures of the judge's daughter.
Excuse
Uh,
me, what?
yes, yes, it's all a conspiracy, you see, and the judge's daughter is somehow involved in this. I mean, I don't know. I think it's
That feels very
complicated.
threatening.
It is, and
Was this after the hearing or before?
I don't remember, but
Uh
I'm
huh.
gonna find out. But I do want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
What? So I can look for it. So you can.
Oh my God. I just
Oh, okay,
pulled
you
up.
got it.
No, I went
Oh,
to Truth Social thinking I'd find it there. And the top of my Truth Social from 34 seconds ago is the Washington Examiner. And here's the headline: Donald Trump arrest, former Illinois Democratic governor pardoned by Trump, calls indictment apocalypse of our democracy. I have to say, I'm proud of the Examiner that they actually mentioned that Blagojevich had been pardoned by him.
oh my god.
I
Yeah,
mean, it
it's just
just
I guess that was the price of getting pardoned.
Oh my
Um,
God. So we've got a t-shirt for sale. I'm not going to even tell you about that.
well, they keep coming up with mugshots of Donald to sell T-shirts, which is kind of ridiculous since there was not a mugshot taken. Anyway, so Donnie posted a picture of the judge and his daughter uh, that says the daughter of Judge Merchant who's overseeing Donald's case worked on the Biden Harris campaign, according to report. And that's on Breitbart. Okay. So consider your source. So Donnie um over the picture writes, seems relevant. Yet another connection in this handpicked Democrat show trial. Illiterate moron. The BS never ends, folks. Daughter of judge on Trump case worked on Biden Harris campaign. So I don't. Do you think the judge will take kindly to such things?
I think this is a really awful situation because your uncle did this a long time ago. Whenever there's a judge he doesn't like, he threatens them. He wants to get taken off of this case. He
Hmm.
wants the venue to be transferred out of this jurisdiction,
To
probably
Staten
out of.
Island.
And would that be just a different DA who's going to dismiss the case? I mean, I don't understand what's going on.
Bigger protests,
I
probably.
think I think this is basically where they are now in their public and legal strategy. Legal, especially, is throw everything against the wall and see what is so awful that the case gets thrown somewhere or other. I mean, he doesn't. He wants to do anything in his power to get away from this judge. This was the judge who happened to preside over the criminal trial where his two businesses were convicted in December.
And that's not unusual, right? That the
No,
same judge would be on a similar case with the same
no,
defendant?
no.
No.
And it was a jury. It was not a bench trial, so it's not
Right.
like the judge decided that.
Well, they don't care because it's like they will say until the cows come home that Bragg indicted Donald. No, a grand
As
jury.
opposed to a grand jury, right?
Exactly, to make because they want him to be seen as somehow culpable. But I think the question then is, will this judge do something? He has a lot of power. He doesn't have to like sit back and take it when these just people who will, as you said, stop at nothing, go after them personally, go after their families personally. That's not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that there can be another part of law enforcement that can look at this. I don't know if this is outside of the FBI's jurisdiction, but it's a little bit
Oh,
complicated. At this point, I think it's probably not just a state criminal law matter, but it could be a federal law matter. And I think it's important to look at that so it's very hard for judges to try to impose any kind of gag orders. I know that at the what I've heard from reporting from inside the courtroom, the judge expressed concern about, like as you mentioned, the baseball bat and the other sort of threats of violence. But I think there needs to be consequences and a talking to because the judge. I remember the judge in the Roger Stone, one of the Roger Stone cases. I might be getting, maybe there's only one. I'm getting the Manafort cases confused.
no,
But in the
it was Roger Stone.
yeah, in the Roger Stone case where there was this gag order, and then we find out he's still, using his social media, maybe it was Instagram or something else, and put up a picture of the judge's head with cross hairs, and
Hmm.
obviously what that means. And yet, even though she hauled his tuchus into court, at the end of the day there was no real consequences. So I think the worst thing you can do is threaten consequences and then not enforce them. And I think it's
But
best.
why? Why?
Why
Because of
threaten
First
them?
Amendment issues?
Well, no, I mean, I just think he gave him in other words, she didn't lock him up again. I don't know. I mean, maybe not wanting to make him a martyr. So I think that if I were the judge, if there's any federal jurisdiction, I'd make those referrals if I was concerned.
Mm, okay. Uh, Now we know, or we've learned, that each of these individual charges carries a sentence of 1 to 4 years. So that's 34 to
It's not
130. I know. I know.
sentencing
That's why I
guidelines don't
wanted
work that way. I mean,
I know
yeah,
that,
go ahead.
but the reason I'm putting it this way is because that's what people are seeing because um august institutions like the New York Post are printing that. So I wanted you to first of all, I do not believe we don't know what's happening in Georgia and out of DC. I think the most serious charges will come out of Jack Smith's investigation eventually, imminently in Georgia, although that's really, really serious, but it does not involve potentially endangering the lives of people working in our intelligence community, like the Mar-a-Lago case might. Um,
But the
but
book ended, right? The
yeah, yeah,
Bragg case is about cheating in the 2016 election,
right.
and then the Georgia case is about cheating in the 2020 election, right? They're
Right.
similar.
Because as those of you who watch the show and listen to us know by now, Donald has never won anything legitimately in his life. He's a loser. He has to lie, cheat, and steal. That's same thing, and that's sort of what the Republican Party has become. But I just I want people to understand that just because each charge carries 1 to 4, it doesn't mean he will never go to prison for this. I don't believe.
He
Um,
won't.
so since that's the case, what could potentially happen? Like what is a reasonable outcome in terms and then I know you have to go and we've all had a really long day. So just like what's a reasonable outcome and what's your biggest takeaway from today?
Well, a reasonable outcome would be a conviction, and then some sort of house arrest. I
Hmm,
mean, even when the thing is, I'm more familiar with the federal sentencing guidelines, and I
right.
probably need to study the New York State sentencing guidelines. But these statutes set an outer limit unless it's a mandatory minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you actually have to look at sentencing guidelines, which are designed to make sure that there's not disparities in sentencing. There's other factors that you look at. And so, with someone who's in theory, a first-time offender, meaning they haven't been in the system before, and it's a nonviolent crime. It depends on how much money is involved. I don't know all the factors again in New York, but this might be something where it would be 0 to X number of months anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you have someone like a former president who's got a secret security detail, I don't see this bringing incarceration.
Nope.
Maybe maybe some kind of at home, maybe he wouldn't even have to have an electronic bracelet because he's got people watching him.
I mean, the problem is if it's house arrest, that like changes his life. Not at all, basically, because he's sort of put himself permanently under house arrest. But all right, so biggest takeaway, and then that's it. We're here to manage your expectations and celebrate with you.
My biggest takeaway is that it's a good day for justice.
Yep.
That he is not above the law. And that they did a really good job on that statement of facts and laying out the theory of the case and interesting details we didn't know before. And let's just watch this thing play out.
Slowly.
Yes.
Well, we'll see you back here in December when they have their next in-person hearing. Jen Taub,
I'll be back here before, of course,
yes. Me too. Thank you so much, my friend. I really appreciate it. I know it has been a long, long day.
Oh, it's just beginning, I think.
All right. I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.